death threats. They went to one athletic director, Danny White, and they were from a group of fans that I think can be bad for the University of Tennessee. I call them LVO fans, Lady Vol only fans. And there's a segment out there that really doesn't care what the football team does, that doesn't care what the baseball team does, that doesn't care what the men's basketball team does, but just likes the Lady Vols. And that's fine. Got no problem with that whatsoever, Caleb. However, I will say this. I think they, at times, have made it more difficult for Danny White or whoever the athletic director might be to put a quality women's basketball program on the floor since Pat Summitt's premature passing. What say you? And I will remind you that if you hit that like button, it would make me very, very, very happy. Like and subscribe. What do you think, Caleb?
I fully agree. Now, just in case any of these fans that went at Danny White jump on here and be like, I didn't send him any death threats, I'll amend to say it was hate mail. It was hate mail, wasn't always death threats, but in a way, they're kind of the same thing. And I am bringing this up because it is very representative of how, you're right, the Lady Vol contingency, this fan base can be so old school, it holds them back.
LVOs,
yes. And by the way, Lady Vol OnlyFans is kind of funny the way you said that. I just want to point that out. I'm just saying, Dave is having some wishes that there was a Lady Vols OnlyFans account.
No, I'm not. I didn't think about that. Sorry. Go ahead.
So, okay. I think there is a subset that is has a certain way of believing that women's basketball should be run, particularly Tennessee women's basketball. And I've said this for a while. It is the same that Notre Dame football has, which is this level of, well, don't you know, we're Notre Dame football. We don't need to loosen up our academic standards or to recruit the way these other people want. They're just privileged to come to Notre Dame. And many Lady Vols people feel that way too from the older guard. So Danny White got a lot of hate mail for firing Kellie Harper, a former Lady Vol. There was what a sleazeball. You can rot in hell for being such an expletive. Wow. The great Pat Summitt would be rolling in her grave. What an expletive you are. I'm done following the Vols. I hope you get nothing but backlash, you piece of expletive. Let's see. And then somebody said that they hope the Lady Vols transfer, the Lady Vols players, every Lady Vols player transfers and the team loses 20 straight games. So that way Danny White will be fired. UT deserves better than a backstabbing. You know what? That's what he said. Someone said, I hope you never die, but I live long enough to see your expletive fired.
Yeah.
And yes, someone said, someone talked about the state of women's basketball today in a much more reserved way, but said, surely you know it is much harder to win a national championship. You've made a grave error, and I believe the University of Tennessee will live to have great regrets for your untimely and ridiculous decision. And our man John Adams got brought into the fold, guys. Somebody said that was a horse you-know-what statement you released about firing Harper. And he said, but you got John Adams and his predominantly male bunch of cutthroat jerks off your back. Congratulations.
Hey, let me clarify. Rustastic said a death threat and hate mail are absolutely two different things. Agreed. I misspoke there. However, neither is appropriate behavior from fans. Agreed with that. But does this really affect what Tennessee does on the men's basketball court or what Tennessee does on the football team, or is this just something that's a slight annoyance? And let me go ahead and tell you, because I'm older than you, Caleb, it hasn't been anything new. As a matter of fact, it was more painful and stinging and dug at a lot of Tennessee football fans when the Lady Vols were winning championships. Then you got the Lady Vols winning championships, and your team keeps getting beat by the University of Florida in September and doesn't play for anything. That's when it really was stuck in your craw. I don't feel like it's that right now. I really don't.
No, I think the older guard, there was a much bigger separation, which I think that's where you saw, you remember this, Dave, a lot of the old Tennessee men's basketball coaches were bitter at the Lady Vol success because they felt it held them back, and they use that as an excuse. And I mean, I think a lot of this is to a degree where Bruce Pearl gets a lot of credit. Whatever you think about him and how he left and him at Auburn and everything, was he really used the Lady Vols existence to his advantage in promoting Tennessee men's basketball.
True. Can I change directions a little bit? Because 2 people posted this on the message board, and I'm kind of thrown off by it. That false fans do this to shine a bad light. Do people really do that? Do people, like, does a Tennessee fan pretend to be a Kentucky fan and email, "You should have never fired Mark Richt. He was a great Christian man. You're going to burn in hell. Ha, 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 ha." I mean, does that really happen? Do people really set up fake Gmail accounts? Because if so, go ahead and like and subscribe.
False flag operations happen all the time in these things.
Really?
To cast aspersions. To cast aspersions. You see it in politics more than anywhere else.
Okay, but does it happen in sports, though? I mean,
yes,
politics does affect our real lives.
And then in the SEC, sports affects the real lives. And so false flags do happen all the time. People will create fake accounts as a fan of one team to say stuff about another. And sometimes they'll do it just to generate media attention. I'll just give you an example.
Everybody, by the way, on the message board agrees with you. So I'm completely ignorant, apparently.
Do you remember 2015 when Cam Newton was having his MVP season?
Yes.
I saw countless articles about the racist hate from Cam Newton on Twitter. I would go to Twitter and I would see a bunch of really bad accounts calling him the N-word, yada, yada, yada. And I started to see them and I'm like, these aren't verified accounts. They're not real people. My guess ended up being, and I'm dead serious on this, I think some blogs created fake accounts saying people are calling Cam Newton this, created fake accounts calling Cam Newton the N-word, and then so that way they could write an article about people being racist towards Cam Newton. I actually think that happened. Yeah, no, I think that happened. People do that because they are so addicted to creating a narrative.
If you want to draw race into it and you're
I'm saying just that's an example. That's an example.
Okay, right. If you want to draw race into it and you're so mad that a kid went somewhere else instead of your school, you're maybe even seen him play a couple of games in the fall and you're like, man, he would have been great at Mississippi State. I can kind of see that, but just putting together an account to rip somebody over firing a women's basketball coach. Boy, if you've got that much time on your hands, I've got some graphic design that you could do for Off the Hook Sports, and we would love to have you be a part of the team, because that to me is bizarro. I mean, when you start a Gmail account, you've got to do all the verifying and you've got to have all that. I mean, that to me is, I guess.
Hey, that's what amidst all of the Russia investigation stuff they were doing, over the years, one of the things that they found out was that Russian leaders, to try to sow division in the U.S., were creating burner accounts to fight with each other on Twitter. Like, it would be like they would create fake pro and anti Colin Kaepernick protest accounts to fight with each other on Twitter, and they would literally organize protests to try to get people to show up for them on separate sides so they could kind of sow the division. That happened all the time. That happens all the time because people. It's better now because I think now in this age of social media, most people have kind of learned how to tune out fake trolls. But I mean, I'll give you an example.
Recently, I've just had to put the phone down for a while.
I'm just going to say this. I'll say this to you. You ever notice whenever a coach or a player is struggling, they all of a sudden come out and talk about all the death threats that they're receiving online? I don't believe them half the time. I believe they're trying to change the narrative. And I think I'm going to come at them.
I'm going to flip it on you, okay? Because I pushed the player to tell me about the death threats one time because it had gotten so bad, and he didn't want to because he didn't want the very criticism that you're doling out. So while you're right, some people use that as a defense.
Jim McElwain did.
I think well, yes, he did. I think that it happens more often than you're aware of and needs to be reported on. So what's the balance there from a reporter's standpoint? You report on it. I mean, you want to hear what the Knoxville News Sentinel said when I got a death threat?
Sure.
From a coach's son. Said, are you going to call the police? It wasn't, we're going to find you some sort of big protector to go with you to practice or anything. It was, you can call the police if you want to. I mean, the death threat, unfortunately, in our society is just that until somebody crazy does something.
Yeah, I agree. It's and we all have gotten them if we're in public, if we're public figures in a public sphere doing things. It's I mean, I got a lot of hate for it, but Dave, I have to be honest with you. Kind of annoyed me when Angel Reese talked about getting death threats after losing to Iowa in the women's basketball Elite Eight a few weeks ago, or a month or so ago, because I'm like, that when people bring up the death threats thing, I'm like, the bigger profile you have, the more death threats you're going to get, because people are just crazy. Now, it was different. Now, I will say this. It was different 25 years ago when you were getting death threats, because if you were getting them then, that means people were actually taking the time to write letters and mail them to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's a little bit different. And so back to the Lady Vols. Could this be a false flag? Possibly. Could Kentucky fans be behind it? Because, by the way, if that's the case, Tennessee fans, you should be excited, because maybe opposing women's basketball fans are really worried about the hire. But I do think there were some people involved, because quite honestly, the blaming John Adams one, let's be honest, that's a real fan right there that did that. That's a real fan that blamed John Adams, that was mad, because that only comes from the Tennessee community to know that. So it was a real fan that blamed John Adams, and they were upset, and they're blaming him for the firing. And there was another one that, so there, I do think there is still, this Lady Vol contingency is real. Guys, you guys forget this. Philip Fulmer let this contingency strong-arm him into making the Kellie Harper hire in the first place, because they were so mad at him for firing Holly Warlick, which was the right move, by the way, to fire Holly Warlick, because it was like, oh my God, you fired a long-time loyal Lady Vol. And then he was trying to hire the best coach afterward, and then they said, nope, got to hire a former Lady Vol. And they went into his office and pressured the heck out of him. And Fulmer, and this is the sign of not a good athletic director, cave to them, because Dave, you and I both know the good athletic directors make the right decision and don't care who they anger, right? Because you can't, but the bad ones try to please everybody and try to get the least pushback.
Yep. A lot of that's true. Travis says if you disagree with someone, you're going to get threats on social media. Seems a little weak to me.